Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a great pleasure to be able to speak in this debate and to follow the Honourable Lady for Glasgow Central, principally in order to say how wonderful it is that the Scottish people have enjoyed the benefits of this great British vaccine success, which hasn't been enjoyed by the entire United Kingdom, funded by the deep commitment to UK life science, which comes from the United Kingdom government. The great Scottish cluster benefits from that hugely, and I was surprised to hear the Honourable Lady not accept and regret the fact that had the Scottish Nationalist Party succeeded in persuading the people of Scotland to leave, they would now not be enjoying the vaccine security that the people of Scotland are, and it's a wonderful thing. We are stronger together in health as in economics. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is, as my right honourable friend, the Financial Secretary, put it very eloquently at the beginning, COVID has been not just a health catastrophe, a global pandemic of a scale that none of us in this generation have seen before. It's also been an economic catastrophe, an economic shock to this country and to the global growth engine, which is not yet over. It's a sign of the generosity of the Treasury's support that it'll only be when the furlough programme ends in the autumn, rightly extended, that the beginnings of the full reveal of the economic damage will strike us all. And it is for that reason that the measures in the Finance Bill and in the wider relief that the Government has put in place are to be so welcomed and are so important. And if I may just start by echoing comments of others and thanking the Chancellor and his team, both ministerial and official team in the Treasury. It isn't that common to praise Her Majesty's Treasury in this chamber, and particularly not to praise it for moving with speed, compassion, and an instinctive desire to spend money on behalf of the health of the British people. But both in the economic crisis, in the crash, when the Treasury moved at pace over one weekend to put in place a phenomenal package to prevent the meltdown of the City of London, and in this crisis, indeed, it's barely possible to think that a year ago the Chancellor stood here and took the nation by surprise with the pace, compassion and speed with which he announced that package. And the fact that over 1 million jobs have been furloughed and protected and £800 billion has been spent in immediate relief is an absolute cornerstone of the fact that the economic recovery we're now beginning to see is so strong. I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful for him giving that intervention. He made the comparison between the Treasury's response to the COVID crisis and the Treasury's response to the last financial crisis. I wonder if, therefore, we ought to be blaming the enormous deficit and debt now on Conservative profligacy, or whether we will finally accept that in 2007-8, as now, the Treasury did exactly the right thing to prevent the economic situation being even worse than it would otherwise have been.
Well, the Honourable Member makes a very interesting point, which I relish responding to. My praise was for the Treasury in moving at pace to solve the sort of crisis incubated by the last Labour government, in leaving this country deeply vulnerable as a result of a whole series of measures put in place during the Blair and Brown years, not least the smash and grab raid on our pensions and the foolish and reckless deregulation. The Treasury moved quickly to solve a crisis. I'm not claiming at the same time that the government of the day wasn't responsible for incubating that crisis. They're different points. But let me return to the budget with which we deal at the moment. I'd gladly give way.
I might just remind him of a fact he will know very well, which is that the leverage ratio of the British banking system was 20 times equity for 40 years until the year 2000. After it went up to 50 times, from 20 times to 50 times in 7 years under a Labour government.
Well, I thank the Financial Secretary for pointing that out, and I'm tempted to remind everyone that the former Chancellor of Exchequer and then Prime Minister sold the gold at a record low and various other things, but I shall be not distracted, simply record that and focus on this budget. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not going to list all the measures in it, but I wanted to highlight one or two that the people of Mid-Norfolk and I particularly welcome, and then highlight three particular points that I think we need to be thinking about as we seek to drive a very powerful recovery. In the budget, first of all, I particularly welcome the measures for the self-employed, who I think in the first part of COVID last year were hit particularly hard, many of them living at risk, hand-to-mouth, living on each month's proceeds without the stability of a company behind them. In particular, also the support for apprenticeships and for traineeships. In Norfolk, we are expecting when the furlough ends to see between 30 and 50,000 people unemployed. And the government has moved quickly and rightly to make sure that there is a very powerful skills and training pathway package in place so that people who've left old jobs, as it were, that have not survived this accelerated crisis, it's accelerated much of the challenge on the high street, can quickly find jobs in the new economy that we're creating. And I wanted to highlight the £700 million package for arts and culture and sports, in particular to make the point that we do need to support the artists and the creative people at the heart of those industries, not just the buildings. It is that genius, that creativity that is so key to the British instinctive creative spirit that we need to support. And rather too many of our great artists are working in all sorts of jobs and seeing their artistic careers disappear. We need to make sure that we keep them busy and that we get them back to work. I particularly also wanted to highlight on the levelling up side a really phenomenal package of support from the government, rightly, to make this not just a moment to prop up the economy pre-COVID, as it were, but to take this crisis as a moment to drive growth out. The 45 town deals, the 8 free ports, genuinely transformational for places like Teesside that have been left behind by successive Labour governments who ought to have been representing them better. The move of the UK Infrastructure Bank to Leeds, the Levelling Up Fund, the Community Renewal Fund, the Help to Grow for SMEs, the Future Fund, and the substantial commitment to net zero and the green infrastructure that we need for a proper recovery. This wasn't just a budget to repair the damage of COVID, but it was a budget to lay the foundations for a more sustainable and sustained economic recovery, creating the jobs and opportunities for generations to come. And it is particularly for that reason that I wanted to welcome it. And that financial package, allied with the extraordinary success of the UK life science community, and perhaps at this point I could, as a former life science minister, pay tribute to their extraordinary work, in particular the scientists at Oxford and AstraZeneca, to whom we owe so much. In Norfolk, the work of the Norwich Research Park and the Earlham Institute that's done pioneering work in some of the genetic sequencing. And I may, if I may at the same time, welcome the work of the Vaccine Task Force, led by the redoubtable Kate Bingham, with whom I know the Financial Secretary has a strong working relationship. I'm tempted to channel my inner William Hague and remember the time that he commended Yorkshire for having more gold medals in the 2012 Olympics than France. In fact, he went further to say that Mrs. Brownlee had won more gold medals than France in those Olympics. And I don't think any couple has done more for the UK health economy than the Financial Secretary and the head of the Vaccine Task Force. I genuinely believe this is a package that is responsible, that is responsive, and that lays the foundations for a resilient set of public finances. The challenge now is to get the growth that we need from the private sector to build a really sustainable recovery. And it's to that I wanted to turn and make 3 key points. Firstly, if we are really to escape debt, the debt legacy from the crash in 2007-8, the debt legacy from COVID, and to build a clean, green, smart economy, the truth is we need not just to get back to ticking over to 2 to 3% growth. To get to 4, 5, 6% growth, we're going to have to be home to, host to incubate economies growing at 100% a year. That's the key to growth in this economy. We can't escape debt by building over the whole of the south of England, by building over any last rural area around Cambridge to support that growth. We've got to make sure we grow those economies that will grow our economy, building back better one local economy at a time and one sectoral economy at a time. So to avoid the boom and bust of city and housing and retail cycles that have left us in this state, the Treasury are absolutely right to commit to a deep infrastructure investment for tomorrow's growth sectors. And I'm delighted that after a short period on the wilderness, the Prime Minister has asked me back to lead his task force on innovation, growth and regulatory reform, to look at where, as we come out of COVID and seek to lay the foundations for this recovery, free from the European Union's regulatory frameworks, but still able to trade with their market, where we may be able to strike a blow for bold innovation and regulation for innovation. And I want to highlight particularly some sectors that are growing spectacularly, and that if we were to invest strategically, and they would help to grow our national economy in the same way. In the bioscience sector, I don't just mean pharmaceuticals, but the broader bioscience, the bioeconomy sector of food, medicine and energy, and in particular where those 3 support each other. I recently sat in a Lotus in Norfolk, built at the Hethel Engineering Centre, powered by Formula One low-carbon biofuel made by genetically modified bugs breaking down agricultural waste. That's what I mean by bioscience, the bioeconomy. In this century, it is biology and bioscience that will, just as physics did in the last century and chemistry in the one before, drive growth globally. And we are a phenomenal powerhouse in the biosciences. And if we invest in that and support it and commercialise it better, we will grow the industries of tomorrow. Similarly, in nutraceuticals, where pharmaceuticals meet food and nutrition, a whole range of new crops that support growth, and crops that are drought-resistant and disease-resistant, crops we can export to Africa to help drive sustainable development. In biosecurity, plant, animal and human health, much of the genomic sequence we share with most of the animals that we rely on in our agricultural system, there are huge opportunities for us to breed out susceptibility to disease and to breed out traits that will lead to huge suffering. So there's a huge opportunity to harness genomics for the benefit of animal welfare as well as progressive agriculture. In AI, in immunotherapy, in space, in biofuels, in carbon capture and storage, and in biodiversity investing. Huge sectors that this country is poised to grow into substantial industries, creating jobs and opportunities for tomorrow. And if we get the regulatory regime for this right, which Brexit gives us an opportunity to do, and as the Treasury are doing, we invest in the deep infrastructure, and we create the right commercial environment, I genuinely think this is a moment we could unleash a new cycle of growth and look back and take this as a crisis, yes, but also as an opportunity. And future generations will thank us for getting us off the boom and bust cycle of over-reliance on short-termism in the city and housing and retail booms to lay the foundations for serious global growth based on technology transfer. My second point is that from the perspective of rural mid-Norfolk, not 40 miles from Cambridge, but at times feeling like 100 miles, 100 years from Cambridge, the small towns are fundamental, and that's why I welcome so much the 45 town deals in the budget. But I think it is vital that as the Treasury launches these funds, and I hugely welcome all of them and the work that's being done, we also think about how we make it easier for the places and the communities that have often been left behind precisely because they don't have the resources of the Metro Mayor. They don't have the big capacity to access multiple government funds, how we can make it easier for them. And I want to suggest that somewhere in the mix is a role for what I might call local regeneration corporations, small, fleet of foot, locally place-based, private-public partnerships with some powers to access money from multiple funds, deploy them over a 5 or 10-year plan to really drive transformational local change and to pull in private finance alongside public, with the powers to do some compulsory purchase, to move in quickly and regenerate land left fallow after COVID, to embrace some of the opportunities of land value capture, of tax increment financing, and to raise infrastructure, bonds and finance. There are many, many investors around the world that would love to contribute to and have a stake in this British recovery, and there are many places around our country that are not going to be able to access on their own the sufficient finance from Treasury. We need to make it easy for them to drive local engines of growth that will go on in decades to come, in the same way that the success of the London Docklands Development Corporation, the Tyne and Wear Development Corporation, the County Durham Development Corporation in the 80s and 90s were so transformational.
Will you give way?
Happily give way.
Very grateful. He makes a very good point about regional economies. In terms of those engines for growth, does he think that regional mutual banks might be part of the solution, very effective in places like Germany and the US, focusing on those regions, making sure that SMEs get lending into the productive parts of our economy? Would he look at that as part of his remit in regulatory reform?
Well, with pleasure. I can go further, and my honourable friend is typically astute and on the money. Yes, absolutely. And it is true that actually in the pension funds of this country, we invest remarkably little in equities at all, remarkably little in small company finance, and remarkably little in our own infrastructure. Now, I'm not for a minute suggesting that Norfolk County Council should put all of its money into the Cambridge to Norwich Railway, although I think it would be quite a good investment. But it would be an awful lot better than finding it had quite a lot in the Iceland Bank during the crash, and we lost a lot of money. There needs to be a reasonable balance, but I think a lot of people in this country would quite enjoy having a stake in their own infrastructure. And if people have a season ticket, what about if they also had a share in the mutual railway company, a share in infrastructure that they're helping to fund and that they're relying on? And I think that is part of this revolution of place-based, one might even, if one was on the opposition bench, call it stakeholder capitalism. You call it what you want, but giving people a stake in their own economic destiny. And the third area that I wanted to highlight is the importance of global markets. If we're really going to become an innovation nation, home to these incredibly exciting technologies that will drive tomorrow's growth, then we also need to make sure we're better connected to those emerging markets around the world, growing at 10 or 20%. As the Foresight report recently highlighted, global population growth means that by 2050 we're going to have to double food production globally on the same land area with half as much water and energy. That is a phenomenal global grand challenge, but it's one that this country is well positioned to respond to with our historic strengths in agricultural science and technology and the biosciences that I've talked about. The real trick is how do we link our leadership in innovation and commercialisation in the city to global markets. And I want to suggest that our liberation through Brexit from the European trading structure, challenging though it is in many ways, does create an opportunity for us to embrace variable tariffs. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, saying to countries in Africa, look, we're not going to charge you like the European Union 40% on food tariffs, that's immoral. We'll reduce it to 5 or 10, but 0 is only for those who are growing, producing at the most responsible and progressive standards, the very highest standards of animal welfare and food quality, and we will help you to do that by exporting the technologies that we've developed here using our aid budget. Madam Deputy Speaker, with those commitments to growth, to local places and to globalisation, I think this is an opportunity, given what the Treasury has done, to make this crisis a genuine moment to unlock a new cycle of growth for the benefit of this country and generations to come.